Hi, and welcome to Testify. Today, we have Parker Jackson, who is the Outreach and Campus Director for Vision Warriors here in Alpharetta, Georgia.
Yes.
Wonderful. Parker, thanks to have you on our show.
Glad to be here.
I've gotten a little bit of time to get to know you over the last few months through helping men in recovery. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about kind of at the height of your alcohol abuse, you had lost everything in your life. How does a child end up at that place in their life?
Interesting. I don't know what point I would start, but I was very successful. I was blessed coming along. I grew up in the church. I was literally went to a church. My dad was an elder. I was at Sunday morning, Sunday evening, Wednesday night. I went to the church school. We had Bible as a class like math and science. We had chapel 2 days a week. So it was ingrained in me. So I learned somebody else's version of who God was. So I grew up, was fortunate enough to go to college, had a good career, married, 2 wonderful kids, was a senior guy in the trust and investment management world in banking. Had a great home, great family, all of that. And as the years went on, my drinking increased, and ultimately I drank everything that I had. I drank it away.
Tell me about that. Tell me, what were you drinking to hide? What was the pain point that you were trying to escape? Take us there.
The pain point, I can't tell you specifically what happened. I laugh now that I had 12 years of sobriety, and that was the first 12 years of my life. Then I had my first drink, and as soon as I had that first drink, some guys can tell you I remember that first drink, but I do know I was changed. It just made me feel better. What it allowed me to do is not deal with life. I could stuff emotions. I could hide emotions. What it allowed me to do was be the guy that I wasn't confident to be. So I could interact with people better. I could do things better. Just before I turned 8, my dad died. So I had a lot of pain, anger, hurt. It took a number of years to realize how angry at God I was. Why would he take a guy that was seemingly so successful, seemingly so good and all of that, and end his life? But then, so I'd never dealt with that. I did. I dealt with it by drinking. And the more I drank, the better I felt. And that was a great solution for me. So it got to where, if I was going out, even in high school, if we were doing something during the week, drink a little bit beforehand, weekends, drink a little bit. Then, interestingly, I got involved with Young Life. A guy named Bill Goins really helped me get to know God. And I know it's an interesting story for some people in that how can you come in and out with your alcoholism and still have that relationship with God? But he never left me. So I came to know the Lord at an early age, and I left him many times over the years, but he never left me. So through Young Life and Bill Goins, I reestablished that relationship, and I didn't drink for the most part. I didn't stay sober the entire time, my last 2 years in high school, and I had significant impact on people at that time because of my change. But then when I went to college, I lost all of my security. It was immediate. When I walked on campus, I lost my security. I failed at making decisions. I was hesitant. I just sat back, which is interesting because I also was a walk-on the soccer team, and I made the traveling team as a walk-on as a freshman. So
Where'd you go to school?
Went to Presbyterian College in Clinton, South Carolina. And so I went there 4 years, graduated, played soccer all 4 years, typical college experience. But I was the guy who, the party life of college, but I was the guy who drank too much and didn't make it out by the time we finally went out, or could make it one night but was too hungover to make it the next night, and continued the drinking. Didn't realize it, but looking back could see my drinking was completely different from other guys. Got into the real world, got into banking, the trust and investment management world, and it started. I got married a couple years after college, and
tell me about that. Tell me about just the courtship of your wife and that
it's a funny story. I was in college at Presbyterian College, and I met my wife, and so the interesting story, and we laughed about this for years, when everybody, how'd you meet your spouse stories. And so she dated my college roommate for 2 years. So We were good friends, and so he and I roomed together our freshman and sophomore years, and then we decided not to room together. Well, after our sophomore year and over that summer, they broke up, and we had just been friends. And so we continued to be friends, and I guess by October of our junior year, we started dating. So we dated throughout college, and when I graduated from college, just decided I lived in Greenville, South Carolina, so I moved to Atlanta, where she's from. And so I moved to Atlanta in August of '88, and have been in the Atlanta area ever since. But we got married in August of '90.
When you got married, did
90.
she know your history and your interaction with alcohol?
No. For many years, I didn't realize I had a problem. I was just normal, and actually, because I couldn't handle it quite so well, I didn't think I was as bad. That's a lot of my story. A lot of my story is looking around at other guys and saying, well, at least I'm not this, at least I'm not that. I haven't done this yet, or I haven't gotten there yet. And that's a lot of what, kept me the way I was, because a lot of the yets, and as you'll hear, a lot of that caught up with me. There's still a lot of yets, thank God, but there are. I continue to compare myself to others and say, but I'm not that guy. I haven't done this. So I think a lot of the time, even early on, I was hiding a lot of what I was doing, so it didn't seem as bad. And yet I wasn't a daily drinker, but I couldn't handle what I did drink because it always went too far off.
Did it ever affect your position in jobs, in church? Did that ever come out before kind of your most recent relapse?
It really, up until 5 years ago, so really through the first, I guess, 40 years of my life, it stayed pretty much under wraps. I guess people probably thought I drank a little much, but they didn't know the extent of it. Typical Southern family, we kept everything below the surface. People didn't know it. The drinking started with getting a beer on the way home from work. I can remember right after we were married. Actually, I remember the rehearsal dinner and afterwards, and then people coming over to the apartment and then just pulling the liquor out that I had hidden from my parents, because in our family you wouldn't have a full liquor cabinet, but we had to stock the bar party, so it was all hidden. I remember literally pulling all of that out. It was so hidden. I was standing on the kitchen counter, and I looked out the back of the apartment to see my mom and stepdad pulling out, and I was literally, the thought was, oh crap, I just got caught. Well, I'm an adult, but already I was hiding my alcohol use. And that's a scene that I've carried 30 years later. But so it was evident if anyone had thought through it, but I started just drinking a beer on the way home, and it was in my mind, well, I've only had one beer. I've only had one drink, and then it became two, and then it became, if you remember the old 32-ounce beers you could get in the glass bottle, I would drink that, and then it became a 6-pack, and then it became a 12-pack. And then the volume grew to that wasn't fast enough, so then it started with the little mini bottles mixed in, and then it got to where, at this point, just talking in terms of the alcohol volume, in my 40s, I was drinking more vodka. Backing up, I had a couple incidences where my behavior was erratic. I was obviously an alcoholic. My mom and stepdad had come and met with my wife and I on more than one occasion saying, you've got a problem. I ignored it. One day, I finally got pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt. And I was coming home from running up to Lowe's and getting something. And I had a case of beer in the trunk, and I had one open beer, and I had it hidden. I was very nervous when I got pulled over. Long story short, I passed the field sobriety test. I got away with it with just having an open container in my car. But that was the eye-opening. So I got a failure to wear a seatbelt in an open container, and I was sent on my way. That next Monday night, I went to my first AA meeting. But when I got pulled over, a neighbor pulled over, a gentleman by the name of Scott, and I'll protect his anonymity. Didn't know it, but he probably had 7 or 8 years in sobriety, and he just pulled over when the cops had me, make sure everything was okay. He kind of knew at that point I was an alcoholic, and he started watching me. So I went to my first AA meeting at Johns Creek Baptist Church. And I walked in on that Monday night, and it was a men's meeting, and didn't have a clue. I had one point in going there, and that was to get my wife off my back. At this point, my kids were probably 10 and 12 years old. I was, in everyone's mind, doing what I should do. I coached all their soccer teams. I coached the baseball teams. Over the years, I coached 20 plus years of soccer, coached a handful of baseball teams. Anything they played that I could coach, I coached. I volunteered at the churches that we've gone to over the years. I've been on the finance committee of churches. I've worked with youth, spent 10 plus years teaching adult Sunday school class. I had a guy that was a pastor in the church, guys who have run major churches in my Sunday school class. Again, it goes back to, but I'm the coach. I'm active in the community. I'm not that bad. But in all of this, I would drink in between. I would coach kids soccer, take a break, run out to the car, drink, go back, coach the second half of practice. My life at this point was all consumed with drinking, but I kept my job together. I kept my family together. I kept the facade together, but I had to keep the drinking. It was interesting. I had this one, and I'll circle back to this. I had this one imaginary line that I didn't cross. I didn't drink on the job. And as long as I didn't drink on the job, I couldn't be an alcoholic because I only drank at night and on the weekends. And if I kept that under control, I was okay. So for years, I never drank before I worked. So I was doing all the things in the community that are expected of me. I was, active in the church. I did everything. So I get pulled over. I go to my first AA meeting, and I walk in, and I listen to these guys. And like a lot of people, I think I was really just scared to death when I walked in. And I sat there. And the same emotion comes back. I was overwhelmed. This is my family. This group of 20 guys I'd never met before. 30 minutes in, it's like, these are my family. And so in AA, you pick up a white chip for your surrender, and I picked up a white chip that night. And
when was that? What date was that?
I don't remember because that was well before I quit. So I was about 40 years old, 41 years old. I'm 54 now, so 12, 13 years ago. Picked up my first white chip, one of many. I jokingly say I could probably retile a bathroom with the white chips I've picked up. So part of my story is that I did this for everyone else. I was there because I'd gotten a ticket on Saturday, and my wife thought I had a problem, but I didn't have a problem. But if it would get her off my back, I would go to an AA meeting. But while it did feel like home, and I knew that was where I needed to be, and I knew at that point I was an alcoholic. But there's a difference in knowing something and wanting to do something about it. And as long as the consequences were there for the way I'm wired, I'm going to continue what I'm doing. My job was still successful. My family still was there. I still had support. I was still doing all the things that society says you're supposed to be doing. So I continued on. I was in and out of AA. My stints in AA were 30, 60, 90 days of sobriety. Going back and picking up a white chip, having different sponsors as I went along. Couple of men that were really important in AA just stayed in touch with me over the years, whether I was in or out. Had my first sponsor named Joe. Joe C. would call me just out of the blue, never ask about drinking, just check in. How's it going? How's your family? What's going on? That's all he would ever do. But it was just that little signal that in my brain, knowing I needed to be doing something different. Men like that who were I now know were keeping themselves sober by reaching out to me. They were steering me in the right direction because they were working a solid program that I didn't have a clue how to do. So I went through a lot of in and out. So I stopped drinking for my wife. I stopped for my children. I stopped for my mom. I stopped just for my job. I stopped for all of that. But I didn't really lose a job probably until I was 43, 44, and I was the senior trust officer for a community bank, and I handled the entire trust department, all the interaction with the government, to the client, to the sales. So I thought highly of myself. I lost that job. In essence, I didn't drink on the job, but the behavior that I acquired from my alcoholism caused me to lose that job. Fortunately for my family, unfortunately for me, I was able to move back into another job within several weeks. I continued my drinking. 4 years later, I lost that job, and that's what started a series of job losses. So I went from my income level plummeted. I went through a series of financial, just nightmares, to where I was making, 30, 40, 50% of what I used to make. Family struggling to get by. At this point, the drinking was a serious problem, but I still wasn't willing to do anything.
What was the relationship like with your wife and kids during that continued escalation?
As my children got older, they knew I was an alcoholic. I continued to drive a wedge between it. Then I isolated my family from me. And so the behavior was obviously alcoholic. By the time they hit the preteen years, they knew dad was an alcoholic. They knew what was going on. The family dynamic shifted to protect the image of the family from the world. So I put them through a lot of hell over those years. It really became, how do we function without this being visible? It was never said. It was never discussed. In hindsight, that's what was happening. We lost relationships in that we stopped accepting engagements. We wouldn't go places. We wouldn't do things. It got to where my wife went out with her friends. We didn't go out as a couple. The marriage was over many years before the divorce actually happened because of my drinking. We lived separate worlds. So where the end came would have been in 2019. So December 5th of 2018, I talked about the imaginary line that I carried for years. December 5th of 2018, I woke up in such bad shape that I had a shot of vodka before I went to work. And
Is that when you decided that getting sober was no longer about your job, your kids, your wife, your church, but it was about you, Parker Jackson?
It happened shortly thereafter. I crossed the line into complete, I would have to say, and we part of what we look at when we're going through the steps is, we depend on God to restore us to sanity. Well, the opposite of, if you're being restored to sanity, you're insane. So at that point, I can draw a line in the sand to say my insanity was full-fledged. It had been, but that was the recognition that I had to have that drink to function to get to work.
So was there a specific instance? Was there a specific event that happened that really got your full attention, that was kind of the climax of your addiction?
What got my full attention was the events that happened shortly thereafter.
Tell me more about that.
February 20, right at the end of February, my wife told me to leave the house for a week. And so I proceeded to just sleep in and out of my car. I would sleep, then knowing her pattern to go to work, I would run by the house at about 6:30 in the morning, knowing she had left for work. I would come in, catch a shower, go to work. Then I would go hang out, drink, sleep in the car. Near the end of that week, I got my first DUI, February 28, 2019. So if you can imagine a 30-year drinking career, no legal issues, no criminal legal issues. That started a span that in 4 months, I got 3 DUIs, a divorce. My son got married, and I went to my first rehab. So in 2019, the timeline is February 28th, my first DUI, March 7th, my second DUI. April 6th, my son got married. April 13th, I signed the divorce paperwork and got it notarized. April 25th, I checked into rehab.
Is that your sobriety date, April 25th?
It is not. I continued. So my divorce was finalized May 29th. I got out of rehab June 3rd. And June 7th, I got my third DUI, and so it's 3 and 4 months. Went back to rehab. Came out, went to sober living, survived for a little while, staying in a sober living. Not a lot of accountability there. Free to come and go. Drugs that wouldn't be tested were rampant. I saw a lot of things going on. So I went right back into drinking again. Got arrested, no charges, spent the night in jail. They simply didn't know what to do with me, so they arrested me. Came out, went to rehab again, got out, and made a poor decision of where to live, and I went back to rehab. So in essence, I went to court while I was in rehab. They drove me to back to Alpharetta for my court case. Was sentenced to 30 days in jail. They deferred it for me to finish rehab. So I was to get out of rehab on December 27th, report to jail on December 28th. Went to spend the night. All I had to do was spend the night one night and show up for jail the next morning. Within 30 minutes of getting out of rehab, I knew what I was going to do on one level. Hadn't consciously thought it, but I was drinking. Showed up for jail 3 days late. Went in, and they basically looked at me and said, "Sir, you're too drunk. We can't take you in jail." So imagine that. You could actually be too drunk to report to jail. And so they put the judge, FaceTime me with the judge, and the judge said, "I'll tell you what, if you show up tomorrow morning by 8:30, we'll act like we'll count today, but if you're not in here and if you're not sober, I'm going to throw you under the jail." So I went to a hospital, spent 12-hour detox. The hospital, literally, God has protected me. There are so many stories that aren't told, but God has protected me so many times and just had his hand on me. But I went to the hospital. They actually helped me through the night. They called Uber, delivered me to the jail the next morning. Judge got me back again and said, "You did your part." So that was my sobriety date. December 30th was my last drink of 2019. So
that was the height of your addictive behavior.
Yes.
Going to jail, having to spend the night in a hospital to even make yourself eligible to get into jail. So since then, tell me the journey. So you've been sober 16, 17 months?
Right. I've been sober 16 months, 22 days. So I went to jail, got out of jail literally with nothing. By that point, I'd lost my driver's license from 2 of the 3 DUI cases. My car was being stored at my sponsor's house. Nowhere to go, no money to go anywhere if I wanted to. Fortunately, he showed up on the day I got out of jail. I was able to call him, and he picked me up. And he said, "I don't know where we're going to go from this." He said, "But I'm not so sure I want you to stay with me." But he said, "Just get in my car." And I drove around. This is a different Joe. This Joe saved my life from homelessness because I would have been homeless. By the end of the day, he said, "I tell you what, you can spend the night with me. We're going to find a place for you." And that night turned into about 10 nights. He and his wife graciously let me stay on their sofa. No one else would have. So I get what you do with these homeless people, because I was right on the edge. And by the grace of God, I was given that final chance to where I didn't have to walk the streets. So I get the feeding ministry that you have and where those people are, because I don't know why, but I had this one man and his wife who said, "Okay, you can stay with us." So I started calling around, and it's interesting. It's hard to find a place to go if you want to get better. It's hard to find a sober living. Where do you go for that stuff? So I found, I talked to an individual named Billy when I was in rehab, and he had mentioned Vision Warriors. I didn't remember the name, but I had heard about it. Basically, God led me to Vision Warriors. And I walked in, I look around, my sponsor took me, and Kirk Driscoll, the founder of Vision Warriors, happened to take me around. He put the fear of God in me with what they do. I still had in the back of my mind, but don't you know who I think I am? That was still there. That's what had driven me into the depths of my drinking is don't you know who I think I am? And I credit a dear friend Natalie for that line. But I still had that thought process. So I'm walking around going, what do you mean? I'm going into sober living. I get that, but I'm going to be in this house. But the alternative was being on the streets. And so I came in with it turns out a lot of humility. I was quiet. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I came into an environment where I had 25 guys who embraced me, who were at different levels, different stages of drug and alcohol addiction, different stages of their recovery. And they came, basically embraced me and carried me when I couldn't. And I literally walked in with $66, no job, no ability to drive, no nothing. And one of the first acts that I remember is I had to go to probation. I came in on a Thursday night, and I had to be at probation at 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning. And Sunday, I'm saying, I have no way to get there. And somebody said, well, there's a board over there just right. I need a ride. And that was horrifying to me, that I had to humble myself to say, I need a ride from somebody to get to probation. And I laugh at myself at the arrogance that I had. I still had so much arrogance when I walked in there. And within an hour of riding, I need to be at this place by 9 a.m. Tuesday morning. 3 guys had stepped up, didn't even know who I was, found me and said, I can change my schedule, I can get you there. And that's what Vision Warriors do. That's what the men do. We embrace the guys around us. And because of my arrogance, it took me a minute. It took me longer. It took me until age 53 to take my last drink. But those guys saw through that. They saw me and they stood by me. They've supported me. And that's what they do there. We're not a program. People call me and ask about it and want to know about our program, but we're not a program. We're a group of men who are serious about their recovery, and that's what we're doing. We're looking for men who want it, not men who want relief. And if you want relief, there are other places. But they carried me when I couldn't be carried. Then they got me a job. They got me everywhere I needed to be. So I stayed there close to a year, and near the end of last year, Kirk Driscoll approached me about coming on staff. And so I joined them right at the end of December, and I'm on staff with them now.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about your current role, because this is the gem. I mean, this is everything that you went through for 52 years. You are now have become a beacon of light for other men that are on your soccer teams, in the schools, the guys that are in the bank teller. And so you've been a guy that's been courageous enough to take off that mask. Let's talk about the victory since then and what you've been doing the last year as the outreach coordinator.
Well, thank you. I don't honestly don't feel like I've done anything. God has. He's kept me alive. I've always had a passion for people. I love people. Like to get to know people, know their story. It's interesting, Jeff, if I don't see you 10 years from now, might not remember your name, but I'll remember about your ministry. I'll know about your job. I'll know about your family. It's kind of a running joke. I'm bad with names, but I'm passionate about people.
And it's kind of ironic that you're sharing your story on a program called What's Your Story?
Right.
And that's the commonality is when we start sharing our stories, what I'm hearing in your story is, man, so much of your story I can relate to. And that's what I'm excited about, is to be able to share that with an audience of people, that there's a guy out there that's going to see this testimony and he's going to be like, wow, Parker, I can relate to his story.
Right.
So I'm honored that you're here. I just, before we end this, our conversation, I just want you to know that I feel honored to be on the opposite side of the table to hear your story. It's incredible.
Well, thank you. And I've enjoyed getting to know you, men like you, because we have that commonality. When we hear the story, they're so relatable of what we can do. And for so many years, I thought, well, nobody's like me, and and part of that was my arrogance. But I'm different. But I'm not. And, I used to jokingly tell my kids, you're unique just like everyone else is. And I had to come to realize that. But the commonality has helped me, and these men have carried me. And Vision Warriors has given me a chance to seek my passion, and that's to be there for other men. I get to talk to many different people throughout the week and on the weekends who are looking for a place, something different. They need something. They hear about us because we are different. We're Christ-centered. Our focus is on recovery, but we also realize 12-step programs are critical, but your relationship with God is critical. But we're not going to manage either one of those for you. We have expectations, and you need to manage your recovery. You need to seek God, and that's as cliche as it is, a God of your understanding, but find that. Because I had to redefine who God was. It was driven into me coming along. This is the God that you're going to worship. Well, I had to go find that God. I've got the book smarts, but I had to find that relationship on my own, and these guys have helped me do that. And that's what I have the joy of doing with Vision Warriors now, is meeting with guys and doing that. And I never would have had the chance without them.
So if you can do me a favor and look into this camera and speak to the guy that's out there that's in that wild wilderness and who needs a beacon of hope or a hand to reach out and help them, what advice would you give to the younger version of Parker, and tell men how they can get in contact with your ministry?
The one thing I'll tell people is you've got to just step back and breathe. You were telling me to breathe because I talk too fast on this, but that's the reality of it is. Catch your breath. Look around you. What I had to realize is I kept putting everything in front of my recovery. I've got to keep my job. I've got to keep my marriage. I've got to do this. There's always one more thing I had to do. And everything I put out there, I lost. I'd been told if I put my job before it, I'll lose it. If I put my family before recovery, I'll lose it. I put all of those in front of them. I lost every bit of it. Through God's grace, I'm rebuilding my relationships with my children. 2 wonderful children. My daughter asked me to walk her down the aisle, and I got to do that in April. My stepdad passed away in March. I got to be there physically and mentally and be present for my mother. But I can only do that because I put recovery first. As stupid as it sounds, you've got to find that point. I want to talk to men. You can reach me at 833-894-4357. As stupid as it sounds, a plug.
Can you say it one more time?
Yes, 833-894-4357. That's for Vision Warriors. I answer that line.
Is there a web address they can visit as well?
Yes, go to waron.org. It's waron.org, like war on drugs.
So WARON
.org.
.org. Okay, again,
So
that's
Warren Addiction.
WARON.org.
Yes.
For any man that needs a hand, a
Correct.
helping hand.
And while we might not be the resource for, or the entity for people, what I'm doing is developing resources so that you can call us. We'll find where you need to go. We'll get you into a detox, into a rehab, in touch with the right people. Just simply be able to place people, because it's so difficult to find where to go. Where do you go? Just call us. I couldn't find where to go. When I finally reached that point and needed help, it was difficult to make that first step, to get into that first rehab, to figure out what to do. And it's not even rehab, it's simply to get to a meeting and surrender. And the surrender was what took me so many years, and accept that I am an alcoholic. And I never regret a minute of my surrender and my acceptance. The surrender is daily, the acceptance is daily. But I don't regret it, because all of the turmoil has created who I am now. God had a purpose for my passion, and that's where I am now.
From this point forward, what do you have a vision for your life moving forward?
And my vision is to seek God. I have today. I used to hate that. I thought it was cliche, but I live it now. I have today. God will determine my future. I cannot afford to worry about my future. I cannot afford to worry what's going to happen. But what I've found, and when I look backwards, is God carried me regardless, and I worried about it. So now I'm attempting to learn not to worry about it, knowing He's carrying me, and He's guiding me, and He's directing me. And So I hope to continue seeking my passion in whatever shape that's going to be, and that's reaching men. Being a part of Vision Warriors, expanding our reach. We're going to be planning at other Vision Warriors locations in the very near future, and that's what we are looking at doing. That's a tangible part that I foresee in the next 6 months. Another shameless plug in that is we provide an opportunity to men, and what the men pay each month in their monthly dues doesn't come close to covering the costs. So we're
So anybody that wants to support your cause can also visit waron.org and become a monthly supporter as well?
Yes, they can become a monthly supporter, one-time gifts. You can also text the word give to 912-400-4530. Thank you so much for having me.
Parker, I just want to end with this, that it's been an honor to sit here for an hour, 30 minutes, hear your testimony. You're a man that I admire. I respect your story. As a fellow cocaine addict with 11 years sobriety, I know how hard the road is, and I just want to lift you up in honor and very proud of just the fact that I can call you a brother, a friend, and anything that I can do in our ministry, anything that I can do to support, please let me know. But I really just want to thank you.
Well, thank you. And it's the guys like you that are in front of me that give me the hope, that give me the drive to know that I can keep doing it. It's mind-boggling to look at somebody who's stayed sober that long. So
Sure.
It's been an honor. Thank you.